I'm Jenny Chin. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Historical Society, and I'm here at the State Archives in Topeka. And if you look at all this vast quantity of material, it is evidence that the state began collecting in 1875. We're standing in the storage area of the archives collection, and I'm holding in my hand really what's a very special and rare document we received this year. It is the diary, or an early diary, of Cyrus K. Holliday. Pat, how did we get this diary? I understand that we used private funds that were given to the Kansas Historical Foundation to help us acquire rare and significant pieces.
Yes, we really appreciate those donors that have contributed to that fund. We tend not to buy things unless they're already in dealers' hands.
What kind of passages have you found in here?
Well, I found some great ones. One is from November 7th of 1854, and he writes, "Kansas City is about 1 mile from and within sight of Kansas Territory and the Kansas and Kaw River. On the evening of our arrival, the first thing we did was to walk over to the Kansas River and when safely within the territory to join in 3 hearty cheers for our homes in the east and our prospective homes in the much talked of Garden of the West."
Well, I am very honored to be holding such a great treasure of Kansas history in my hands. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, we're thrilled to be able to get it.
We're looking at a series of documents here that are from the WCTU. Can you explain who the WCTU is and where these documents are from?
The WCTU stands for Women's Christian Temperance Union, and they were an organization that wanted to have prohibition, to do away with the use of alcohol. These records come from Walnut, Kansas, but they also come from the 3rd District, so it covers that county and also Crawford County.
What do these records tell us about how the women were approaching the issue of prohibition in those days?
They were doing fairly traditional lobbying kinds of efforts.
Well, how did we get this wonderful set of records here?
This was a donation from a woman named Carol McNary from Overland Park, Kansas, and somehow she ended up with these records and decided to donate them to the Historical Society.
Well, we're, I guess, very grateful to the community of Walnut and the women in that community for donating these to the people of Kansas. It's a great gift.
It's a great collection.
The Kansas Historical Society also maintains an active archaeology program, and we're here in the archaeology storage area that is right off our lab.
This is by far the largest investigation of a Kansas village to date, and we are learning so much about these people for whom the state is named for that we didn't know previously. It's important for us to understand these people and their lifeways.
What do we have here, if I could ask? This looks like an axe, perhaps?
This is a trade axe, and this would have been traded through the French fur traders for furs, and they would be used instead of the traditional chipstone hand axes that were used prior to European trade.
And there's an interesting story about these flint knaps.
These are the gun flints that attach to rifles and pistols. These specifically are pistol gun flints that create the spark that light the gunpowder to fire a firearm. We have 2 different types here. We have a French gunflint, which was manufactured in France and then traded with the Native Americans, and then we have an English gunflint that was manufactured in England and then traded with Native Americans. There is a difference in time between the French gunflint and the English gunflint. Prior to the 1800s, French were the dominant gunflints within the Americas, and then after the 1800s, the English was the dominant gunflint within the Americas. And so you're looking at a temporal shift between these 2 particular gunflints.
And of course, before statehood, this territory was really the area that was for native peoples and also French traders and then English explorers that are coming in. So that's what we have evidence of here, right?
They were trading almost exclusively with a French family, and the French family was getting their materials from France. And then there was a shift to where British trade became more abundant and more prominent, you had a shift to strictly English goods.
Well, you know, I'm personally so interested in this site as sort of a student of Kansas history because we don't have a lot of information on many of these native villages during the period of contact.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you have any pieces here, it looks like you do, that reflect adaptation of old traditions that would have been part of the Kansas tradition, but using new materials or some sort of adaptive technique once they meet Europeans and later Americans?
This is an excellent example of an item that has been adapted to a new cultural use. Prior to use in the Americas, the hawk bell was strictly a hawking device. It was attached to gaming hawks on their feet for hunting purposes, but they were heavily traded in the Americas, and the Native Americans used them as a decoration for their personal clothing, not for hawks. So this is a piece that was developed for one use in Europe, but once it got to the Americas, it was used for something totally different. This transitional period between a traditional Native American life way to a European influenced Native American life way, and then eventually a European dominance in the area. This site represents that transitional moment.
We're here in museum storage at the Kansas Museum of History, which is a division of the Kansas Historical Society. So Bob, can you tell me a little bit about this particular donation?
Sure. This came into the collection this year in 2012. It was donated by Valerie Mendoza, who is the granddaughter of the woman who had the sash and crown, and it was worn by Hazel Gonzalez Gomez, and she was the queen of the fiesta in 1943. Now the fiesta had started in 1933, so this would be the 11th fiesta they had, and as you mentioned, it is to raise money for Our Lady of Guadalupe School. And in order to become fiesta queen, there's usually a competition of selling tickets and selling votes. That's how folks would vote for the queens and the princesses and that type of thing. Well, Hazel Gonzalez was one of the founders of a group called the Y Señoritas, and that was a organization in the YWCA. And they were founded during the Second World War, basically to give soldiers that were stationed in and around Topeka something to do away from military life. So they sponsored dances and concerts and get-togethers, and Hazel was one of the founders of that. So she says that anytime the soldiers had a dance at their base, they would sell tickets for her. So she says that's why she won. She credited it to the soldiers that she had helped out through the Y Señoritas program.
Why is this significant to our collection? What does it fill a gap? Does it enhance a story we already have?
Yeah, we took it for a number of reasons. First, the Fiesta is one of the longest running Hispanic celebrations in the state. It does fill a gap in documenting minority cultures, and it does talk about community. I mean, here are people coming together for a like cause, and that sense of community, that sense of culture, that sense of cultural identity, we felt was all sort of wrapped up in these artifacts. So we were very pleased and very fortunate that her granddaughter thought to donate these to us. Hazel Gonzalez Gomez passed away about a decade ago, and so her family donated them this year.
I wonder how she would feel that her accomplishment is sort of being immortalized for it's part of Kansas history.
I think she'd be very pleased. Hazel was very active in the community.
Well, Bob, this is a very different type of artifact, and of course it comes out of a tragedy, though because it says all accounted for, it is probably as celebratory as the other artifacts we just looked at from the Fiesta. But could you tell us the story of this artifact?
This is an all accounted for sign from the 1966 Topeka tornado. Now, this was one of the most destructive tornadoes in state history. And as it passed through Topeka, it did tremendous amount of damage, and there were 16 people, unfortunately, killed. emergency crews went through the devastated neighborhoods following the tornado and posted these signs on houses to indicate to emergency crews that they no longer had to search for people in this particular house, either survivors or those who might have been injured. And this particular sign came from the house of Glenn and Lucille Eisen, who lived on Southwest 30th Street here in Topeka, and it was donated by their daughter, Glenda Bauer, this year. Following the tornado, the Eisens came out of the rubble of their home and found their neighborhood virtually destroyed, and they immediately began checking with their neighbors to make sure everybody was okay, and miraculously no one in their neighborhood was killed. You can see by the staple marks and the hole in the center that this was affixed to the house, and it's in remarkably good condition for an artifact that was out in the weather. So we're very fortunate that the family thought to save this following the tornado and then donate it here to the museum. The Eisens had heard the warnings and luckily took shelter in their garage between their two cars. And following the tornado, the Sunday afterwards, Glenn wrote a letter to his mother that we have here in our files, where he described the sound of the tornado coming in, all of the lights going out, and he said it sounded like the end of the world.
Collecting artifacts and documents of the past helps us to better understand the story of our state.